To everyone watching from the outside, they looked like the perfect couple. Successful, stable, and happy. They owned businesses. They had a child. They were the kind of family people in town admired. But behind that image was something far darker. Court documents claim that the husband was involved in a murder-for-hire plot targeting a man and his pregnant girlfriend. His wife, recently arrested too, accused of being part of a criminal organization. This case is one wild reminder that you never really know what's going on behind closed doors.
Let's get to this new twist in this wild story of alleged gang violence in a quiet town in Indiana.
Meet the Bachman family, Henry and Courtney. They live in New Albany, Indiana, a quiet town just across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. Together they owned a local bar and a tattoo shop. To neighbors, they were the definition of normal. Friendly, hardworking, always smiling. They had a young daughter, and life looked perfect. But that illusion shattered on the morning of May 13th. Around 11 a.m., gunfire erupted outside their business. An SUV pulled up, shots were fired, and it sped away. No one was killed, but a man in a nearby barber shop was hit in the foot. Police quickly made arrests. 3 men, Joseph Felicia, Cody Vest, and Aaron Brown. According to investigators, Felicia paid Brown $5,000 to attack a man and his pregnant girlfriend, even handing over the gun himself. When Brown was caught, he gave up the others and led detectives straight to critical evidence. Vest was accused of modifying the SUV to hide the crime. All 3 were also hit with serious drug charges. But this was just the beginning. Detectives followed the trail, and it led straight to a well-known businessman, Henry Bachman. Neighbors were stunned. They told reporters Henry was a nice guy, always chatting, always friendly. But when police raided his bar and tattoo shop that September, the truth started to surface. Investigators discovered connections to the Outlaw Motorcycle Gang, a notorious organization tied to violent crime, weapons smuggling, and drug trafficking. The victim allegedly had issues with a specific chapter known as Menace 13, and Bachman, according to investigators, was closely tied to it. Phone records revealed multiple calls between Henry and Felicia. In one call, Brown claimed he overheard Henry complaining that the victim still wasn't dead. Things got worse. Detectives got into a signal group chat allegedly used by Menace 13 members. In the chat, Bachman reportedly shared a photo of the target, saying the man was switching sides. Someone replied, "Yeah, he knows way too much to be switching sides." Then came the texts between Felicia and Henry, where Henry allegedly told Felicia to cut him off, referring to the target. Surveillance cameras also caught Brown entering Felicia's home days before the shooting and leaving with an AR-15 rifle and ammunition. And if that wasn't enough, police also listened to recorded jail calls after Felicia's arrest. In one call, Felicia allegedly said, "Henry should be paying all my attorney fees." In another, he warned, "Get the point across to Henry. He either pays, or me and him are going to be real close friends." For the next 56 years, Henry Bachman was soon arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and several other felonies. But just when people thought things couldn't get crazier, they did. While Henry sat in jail awaiting trial, his wife, Courtney Bachman, was also arrested. She was charged with corrupt business influence, money laundering, 3 counts of theft totaling nearly $750,000, and committing a felony while part of a criminal gang. Investigators say she ran their businesses off the books, paying employees in cash, keeping no payroll records, and hiding income. When police searched their home, they reportedly found $35,000 in cash. Court documents claim the couple underreported their sales to the state of Indiana by nearly $288,000 between 2023 and 2025, and failed to pay about $20,000 in sales tax. Courtney has since posted bond. Henry remains behind bars waiting for his trial, which could start as soon as next month. As for Aaron Brown, the man who connected it all, he took a plea deal for cooperating with authorities. He's now set to spend 12 years in prison.
Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, one of the most watched shows on all of YouTube, I need to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys and they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 clicks on your phone. So if you've been injured and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. Joining me now to talk more about this is Jim Trusty, the former chief at the Department of Justice for the Organized Crime and Gang Section. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. This story involving a motorcycle gang, allegedly, which is why it's so great to talk to someone who has experience with these, because sometimes, I mean, not to do the cliche of we only hear things in movies, but this seems like the type of case that could be that. Just first off, how active are motorcycle gangs when it comes to criminal activity?
Yeah, they've got a pretty long shelf life. You know, there's certainly obviously all sorts of motorcycle clubs that are not at all involved in criminality, or such low-grade criminality. It doesn't really get on the screen for law enforcement very much. But you've got some established enterprises like the Outlaws, which is the one that we're talking about today, Hell's Angels, some other regional type gangs that are motorcycle gangs that have affiliated themselves with national ones. And so they're still out there, and it tends to be kind of drug oriented and violence oriented, and it can be a little secular. It can be a little difficult to know what's going on from the outside, but they're still out there every day, it seems like.
Yeah, and in this case, there's apparently some sort of issue they had with the target of this alleged hit. He was in bad standing with the gang. I mean, in these cases, because I could see where it is, you charge someone with trying to orchestrate a hit, but when it comes to prosecuting a case like this, how do you link it to something larger than that if you were looking at the entire organization that they're accused of being a part of, this Menace 13 bike gang?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, really, for any sort of gang criminal enterprise type case, and I was doing federal RICO cases for years, you're looking for a pattern of racketeering activity. So you're looking for more than one incident, and you're looking for kind of the best direct inside information you can get. Sometimes it's a wiretap. Sometimes, gangs are sloppy in terms of their use of telephones. I don't get the impression that's any part of this particular case. But you also, if you can't do wiretaps and you look to leverage people, you look to get informants. And this case, you always hear about omerta. You hear about the code of silence within criminal gangs, and certainly motorcycle gangs have a long history of that. And it kind of it's interesting in two directions. The first is that a lot of the violence you see in gangs is just like this case, where it's inwardly directed, where they're worried about people cooperating with the police, which kind of breaks the golden rule. The second thing is, for all their talk about omerta and for all of their condemnation of guys that are in bad standing because they're accused of cooperating, when they get arrested, a lot of them flip. And so, this is a case where you can tell from reading between the lines, and even overtly at some points in the complaint, that guys got arrested and immediately were giving up everything they can think of. So the authorities end up with a really good head start on this particular shooting. But whether you're going to try to build that into a broader case that tells the whole story of Menace 13, as they were called, or an outlaw affiliate, then you've got to get some historical. You've got to dig and find more and more information, which could be drug trafficking, could be acts of violence, could even be certain types of fraud that would qualify to make it into a racketeering type case.
Yeah, and in this case, the 3 people arrested in connection to the shooting originally were all facing drug charges, and that seems to be at the heart of this case as well. You did federal cases, big time cases. When it comes to the suspects in this case, at this point, I'm not saying they're big fish, but I mean, in terms of the level of where they would be standing in a gang, where would this rank in terms of the overall gang activity when it comes to a national group like the Outlaws?
Yeah, hard to know so far. I mean, look, one thing you'd want to know from your cooperators, and it looks like from this case, they already cut a plea that envisioned cooperation with Mr. Brown. You want to know what the history is. How long have they been in the gang? What's their position? Do they have an officer's role within the motorcycle gang. That tells you a lot. How do you get into a gang like that? A lot of gangs you are beaten in. So you're hard pressed to pretend you didn't know that it was a violent organization when you spent, a half a minute or a minute having the snot beat out of you by your new colleagues. And so there's a lot of digging that goes into it, looking into old police reports, looking into old arrests, flipping people, talking to cooperators, talking to victims. You could build up a case that gives you a solid knowledge of this Menace 13 group. But really, from what we have on this particular shooting, it's hard to kind of weigh it compared to other national entities yet.
And Brown is interesting because it seemed from the court documents I've seen in the reports that he really gave up everybody, gave up the evidence. I mean, he had to cut a plea for this. He's going to get 12 years reportedly in prison. But I also think if this was a group of people that were willing to try to kill somebody allegedly because they were too close with the police or were in bad standing with the gang, and this guy's given up everybody and everybody knows his name, what does life look like for him in prison?
Yeah, difficult. And by the way, it's 12 years, but half suspended. So he did pretty well
Yeah.
for an attempted murder or a solicitation to commit murder. And so he'll only serve something less than 6 when it's all said and done. I don't know if he's safer in jail or on the streets, because the reality is most of these gangs have contacts on the inside, have people that are there. And so he may live the life of being in some sort of segregated unit, and protective custody in most prison systems sounds like the way to go. I think, like, if I was going to prison, I would kind of, volunteer to be in all by myself. But the reality is it's very grinding mentally. And so a lot of people that start off in protective custody find that 23 hours a day in lockdown ain't for them. And they end up wanting to go back in the general population, even though it could be very, very dangerous for them. So, he's going to be looking over his shoulder, most likely, as a cooperator. The only good thing you can say is I suspect that other people in this chain may have cooperated as well. So for all of their talk about, going after somebody who broke the rules and who was seen with a police officer, at the end of the day, they're all saving their own skins, it looks like. And in some ways, that diffuses the importance of Mr. Brown.
And in Brown's case, because I'm sure the defense attorneys for Henry Bachman, when he goes on trial, you're really going to attack the credibility of Brown in saying, I had nothing to do with this. And like, maybe you have text messages, I didn't like the victim. I'm not an attorney, but that's the argument that I would assume they would probably make. What goes into the decision of whether you are going to give someone a plea and recognizing whether he is actually going to be a credible witness in this trial?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, number one is a lot of time behind closed doors, taking a proffer. In other words, giving him the ability to talk to you and prove his worth by giving you details, some of which you know, and therefore you can tell if he's telling the truth, and some of which you don't know. I mean, it's a little like snake handling, though. You got to be really careful, or they turn around and they bite you. And so some of it's internal, like you're sitting there, you're interviewing him, you're trying to find out, what is this guy protecting certain people? Is he falsely incriminating certain people? Is he consistent? But then the big thing for trial, for jury consumption, tends to be corroboration. What else can I show that shows this guy is telling the truth? And I think in this case, if I remember correctly, they got videotape from Flesia's house that shows Brown with the weapon. So
Right.
yes, it hurts Brown in terms of, showing that he's an active participant, but it's perfectly consistent with what Brown told him before they recovered that video. So, the more you can show from independent sources, either other cooperators that are interlocking with him, or text messages, or physical recoveries, such as the gun, which apparently they got, the car that made its way towards Louisville, anything that they have that kind of shows this guy told the truth is going to be very important for jury consumption.
Then you have Courtney Bachman, who's arrested, and it seems like there's a lot of financial crimes alleged related to this bar that they own. She paid employees in cash. She underreported hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state of Indiana. Seems very sketchy in terms of running a business, but in terms of how she'll be prosecuted and potentially linked to the criminal activity of her husband, how do you take those numbers of underreporting? Why would that matter? Paying employees in cash. Why would that matter if she's being accused of being part of this organized crime syndicate?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're trying to make the biker bar kind of the center of the gang universe here, then it makes sense to show that even the operation of the bar was completely dirty. And that, as a husband and wife, you can certainly infer that the husband had kind of active knowledge of what she was doing. Look, I think a lot of it is probably more about pressure. They're not dying to do a tax case with whatever couple $100,000 worth of loss to Indiana. I think they're looking at it as put as much pressure on as many people as we can. The pressure on her could also serve as pressure on Mr. Bachman, meaning they could get to a point where they wire a plea offer to him and say, either plead guilty or we're going to go full bore on your wife, or but if you do accept the plea, we might be able to walk away or give her a light treatment. So we'll kind of see if chivalry is alive and well when it comes to the negotiations with the Bachman family, I suspect.
And with Bachman, because it seems like the main link is Flesia texting Bachman and them having some sort of conversation. There was messages in the Signal chat as well that Bachman was part of, and then you also have Brown saying he overheard things. I know that there's probably a lot more that we don't know of what could play out at trial, but as a defense attorney, would you like your odds at this point in trying to maybe sever him from this hit that happened? How strong of a case does it seem at this point that Indiana could have?
It's just too early. I mean, when you get, I think what you would do as a defense attorney is you'd say, I hear you that this doesn't look like an airtight case. It's not a case that's built on forensics, for instance. It's built on potential cooperation and witness testimony of a lot of people that have baggage. I mean, including the victim, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, we don't really know what we don't know. Like, there could be, for all we know, there's surveillance video that captures the hit. I mean, they don't have to put that stuff into the limited documentation we've seen so far, or they might not have recovered it by that time. So case could get considerably stronger for the government. But right now, on its face, you would say, hey, it's a cooperator-driven case. Guys have baggage. This guy got a sweetheart deal. Other people may toe the line and not agree to cooperate. So yeah, you could certainly try the case from what you're looking at right now. It's just too early to know the full discovery material that you're going to see.
And then with the Bachmans, I mean, they were business owners. I mean, they still are, and they're innocent until proven guilty. But, business owners in the community, seems like a nice family on the surface. There's people when he was arrested that couldn't believe that he would be accused of something like this. When you see organized criminal activity, maybe it's a biker gang or some other form of organized criminal activity, how often is it on the facing side, they seem like very normal members of society, but then they have operations behind the scenes that no one would realize until an arrest is made?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of that. I mean, I was heavily involved in prosecuting MS-13, a very different gang than Menace-13, although they're all enamored with that number. And it was really interesting to me because the MS-13 guys we prosecuted in the Maryland metropolitan area, Maryland, D.C., Virginia, almost all of them had day jobs. They'd go out, they'd work construction, they'd go do something on the streets. And so you really didn't have criminal activity from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And then by Friday night, these guys would get together and they'd go out and they'd say, we need to kill a rival. And they would do it. And so it was a really kind of a strange dichotomy that you had people that appeared to be just kind of working stiffs that would do normal work. Now, they might not have had a whole bunch of supporting friends and family to say, I think he's the most, hardworking, law-abiding person. But there was that kind of, I don't know, dichotomy or split personality of being productive during the day and doing kind of hard work and then coming home and hooking up with a gang and going out to kill people.
And then just last one for you, because I've always just been fascinated with biker gangs and how like the Hells Angels can have a lodge, like the Elks Club. That's like an actual location. Everybody knows where it is. And yet they're recognized by like the DOJ as like a criminal syndicate. MS-13 doesn't really have like a local Rotary Club lodge in a town. I mean, how is it that these biker gangs, they can be so public? I think some of them even do like charity events, but then at the same time have this criminal part to it where we do see stories like the one that's alleged here.
Well, I think part of it is just because there's so many biker clubs and they talk about the 99% and the 1%. Everyone that's in a biker club says we're part of the 99%, meaning we're lawful. And the problem is the 1% or whatever the number is that actually engage in criminal stuff say the same thing and try to have kind of a public face. So you're right. They're not the only type of gang that would try to dabble in kind of public relations. The Latin Kings, for instance, were trying to elect people into office as Latin Kings. So there's kind of a strident thing to that. And I think for bikers in particular, there's a little bit of an American kind of nostalgic view that they're not really that big a threat to anybody outside their own circles, and that there is a history of them, not engaging in criminal activity for at least the vast majority of people that ride motorcycles. So it's a weird dynamic you put your finger on, but I think there's almost a romanization of how these guys operate, and that they're not really that dangerous. But the reality is they are. I would just add, federal prosecutors do their best to go after the clubhouses, the patches, to try to forfeit both physical property and even intellectual property from these gangs. And they've had mixed results over the years on the intellectual property, but the physical property they can usually prove up as part of a RICO and seize that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case out of Indiana, outside of Louisville. I know that some of the defendants, they'll be headed to trial next month, and we'll see how it plays out. Jim Trusty, great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us.
Sure, my pleasure. Good to see you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.